So in this video, we are going to cover what determines a valid notice of termination or a valid notice of eviction. Essentially, in order to end a tenancy, a landlord has to serve either a letter or something formal to notify the tenants that their tenancy is coming to an end. So this valid notice of eviction has to be in writing. A landlord can't just willy-nilly send a text message and say that they want you out of the property in the next week or whatever. It has to be formal. It can't be an email either. So yeah, a formal letter, a formal notice that is signed by the landlord or their nominated letting agent. The notice of eviction, in order to be valid, it has to include the date that the notification was sent. If you are in your tenancy for more than 6 months, that's usually when your tenancy rights kick in. And or if you have a fixed term tenancy, you basically cannot be evicted for any reason. And in the notice of eviction or termination, the landlord has to state the reason why the tenancy is coming to an end. And those reasons are very specific in the legislation, and the permitted grounds under which a person can be evicted is basically here. So a landlord would have to maybe say in the notification of termination that you are in breach of your tenant obligations, and obviously that would be something that you could contest in the RTB if you wish to do so. Or perhaps the dwelling is no longer suitable to your needs. And again, that would be from the perspective of the landlord. So you would also be able to contest that or appeal it if you wanted to in the RTB. Maybe the landlord wants to sell the property, or perhaps they decided that they wanted to kind of recuperate the property to use it for their own personal needs, either that themselves are moving in or a family member. Or they maybe can put in the notice that they have decided to refurbish and renovate the place. And that doesn't mean like a lick of paint on the walls and, I don't know, changing the doors or whatever. It's like substantial. It would mean that the house wouldn't be habitable for you to live in anymore while construction is ongoing. Or maybe the landlord decides to change the use of the dwelling. So for example, there are areas where property is zoned for residential, but perhaps maybe the landlord decides to change it to commercial or offices or something like that, but they would have to include the reasons why in the notice of termination. Unfortunately, if you are in your property for less than 6 months, your tenancy rights haven't yet kicked in. So think of it like a 6-month probation period. Like if you're like what would happen in employment, you basically will be in your property for 6 months on a kind of probationary period, and then once it passes the 6 months, that's when those tenancy rights kick in. And that's when a landlord, if they've decided to terminate the tenancy, that's when they have to put in the reasons. So before 6 months, they don't actually have to say their reasons why. They just have to give the minimum notice requirement. And that brings us on to the next slide. So the landlord has to obviously give you the proper notice period, and that has to be stated in the notice of termination or eviction. So if you have less than 6 months, they don't necessarily have to state a reason. They just have to state that they're giving you 28 days to leave the property. And they also need to write in the notice that you have the full 24 hours to leave that property. Say, for example, today's date is the 26th of May. If I'm getting evicted next month, I would have, on the dates that I'm due to leave, I would have the full 24 hours to leave that property. After 6 months, you essentially are entitled to 90 days notice of eviction. And then after 1 year, but less than 3, it would be 120 days. And then after 3 years, it would be 180 days. And then after 7 years, it would be 196 days. And then after 8 years, it would be 224 days. So it's really important that is included in the notice. And then essentially then the landlord would also have to put in the notice of termination that you have the ability to take any questions or queries you have in relation to the notice of termination or eviction to the RTB. So, for example, if you look at your notice and you see that maybe the date in which it was sent was not on the notice, you could contest that, the validity of the notice, or you can contest it in the RTB. So essentially, this one means that, like, in the notice of termination, the landlord has to kind of inform you that you have those um opportunities of recourse available to you. So, and you have 28 days to do that. So that kind of has to be stated in the eviction notice as well. So just to sum up, on a valid notice of termination, and this is kind of like the conclusive list, is that it has to be in writing, it has to be signed by the landlord or letting agent, it has to include the date that the notice is being served, it must state why the tenancy is ending, and that must be a legal ground. It can't just be anything that they make up, you know. And bear in mind that point is for fixed tenancies or after tenancies that are longer than 6 months. The next point then is that the landlord must give the end date and state that the tenant has a full 24 hours on that date to leave the property. And then it also must state that you, as a tenant, have 28 days to raise any grievances or queries or questions in relation to the validity of the notice with the RTB. So that was just a quick slide on the validity of notices and what they must include. Some more resources available to tenants. We always end our kind of PowerPoints and videos with this. We've got CATU Ireland, which is the Community and Tenancy Union, sorry. We have Mercy Law. The RTB is a great website. Citizens information as well is very accessible. We've FLAC, Free Legal Aid, Threshold, and of course ourselves, ICON. We're a community-based organisation in the Northeast Inner City. And just to end, that is our details. If you have any other housing related queries, please don't hesitate to get in contact with us. We're hoping to do another video on landlord obligations, and then we will also be doing a video on how to take a case with the RTB, and it will be a step-by-step process and talking you through the website. So on that note, I'm going to say goodbye and looking forward to seeing you again. Thanks.